Next up is Frank Rankin.
So yeah, I think I can confidently say that my paper was the only one at conference to draw its name from a medieval classic of Christian spirituality. Reflecting really the fact that I think there is a real danger that organisations look at cloud technologies, they go at it blind, and that can either be blindly trusting cloud technologies or blindly dismissing them as being just way too risky for our information assets. I work in NHS Education for Scotland, which is one of the special health boards in Scotland with around 800 staff, and who are responsible for training and workforce development across the NHS. And our organisation has a digital strategy which is aiming to be digital by default and moving from a very complex model where our users have to access many different platforms, different gateways. These are hosted in a mixture of different ways, some hosted internally, some on a mixture of externally hosting and indeed cloud environments. Move from that to a position which is user-centred, and the users have got a single point of access to all the information systems they need to engage with in the NHS. And critically, the decision has been made strategically: this will be hosted in the cloud. These are going to be based on cloud solutions. So the decision is made, certainly for NES. It is very early days, and one of the things that I made clear at the conference session is that I'm not offering a masterclass here, I'm thinking aloud. So I'll be very interested to hear your comments and thoughts. A quick show of hands, how many of your organisations are already consciously using cloud technology as part of your information architecture? Maybe a little more than a quarter. How many are intending to do so? And how many have decided you're definitely not going to use cloud? Nobody's ruled out altogether. There were a couple of people when I made this presentation at Celtic Manor who said their organisation had just said no, and that was largely from a security point of view. Just to get a couple of definitions out of the way about what we mean by cloud, and the NIST in the States give us some of the standard definitions that the industry uses. But it's a model of computing that it's on demand, it's scalable, it's ubiquitous. The characteristics are that resources are pooled and they're elastic as well, so that we can expand and contract our storage or processing needs quite quickly. It's a measured service, it's on demand. The different models, and this is a simplification, obviously there's a continuum, there's a spectrum of models, but it can range from infrastructure as a service, where all you're hiring is effectively some server space on the cloud and you're managing the software within that, to software as a service, which is where you are just using it out of the box on the cloud. So, for example, things like Google Docs and Office 365, where you're doing nothing except engaging with it and using it for productivity and what have you. It can also be deployed in different ways. So there can be true public cloud, accessible to anyone. You might have community clouds where a community of interest has developed some cloud capacity, or a private one where it's externally hosted but managed directly by one client, or a mixture of these. There is a school of thought that sees cloud computing as a third generation of computing, so it's a move akin to the shift from mainframe to PC, with a similar impact on the way we manage information and on the way we secure information. My current digital director in NHS Education for Scotland has a different example. He talks about how in the 19th century factories would have their own electricity generating plant, whereas today nobody would think of building their own electricity generating capacity. And that similarly, computing will become a commodity that's bought off in the way that other electricity and other supplies are at the moment. The European body, ENISA, incidentally, you're not going to reduce the number of acronyms you deal with when you're looking at cloud issues. They talk about cloud-specific risks, some of which I've emphasised from this list. So the loss of governance, the danger that the transition to the cloud isn't effectively governed, lock-in to a particular supplier, so picking up on the issues Heather raised about being tied into one supplier with no obvious way of extracting your information assets and moving to another. The data protection implications, I'll unpick that a little bit more. How far cloud providers are in a position to categorically assure you that they have effectively deleted or disposed of data. But there are also benefits, information security benefits from the cloud that I need to recognise as well. So the benefits of scale. Security is a market differentiator. It's quite interesting to see some organisations, Microsoft in particular, really pushing information governance, information security as part of its market offering. And we see TV adverts which are all about privacy. There's a lot of names from us on those adverts from Microsoft. So part of the benefits of scale, more timely and effective in terms of updates and defaults of software, and the benefits of concentrating resources. It is also a maturing industry. You probably recognise at least some of those names, so as well as the providers. There are organisations like Cloud Security Alliance who are pulling together a lot of standards and education resources. You've got some useful online training videos, for example, to help you get some groundings in the concepts. This is where people get nervous. It's when they recognise that moving to the cloud means you are ceding control, and that depending which model of cloud provision you go for, you're ceding more or less control. So we're progressing left to right from on-premises to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, to software as a service. So at the point at which you're using something like Google Docs or Office 365, all of those areas are directly controlled by the vendor. And that's not to say you don't still have things to control and manage. We'll look at that a little bit more in a moment. But I think that's a cultural shock for a lot of organisations. It's a cultural shock for our colleagues. It's also a challenge in that the move to cloud generally does impact directly on people's jobs, particularly our technical colleagues, of what the scope of those jobs will be in the future. So we shouldn't underestimate the cultural leap that our organisations are having to make. Because of that control, that the scale of control has been transferred to vendors, a lot of information governance task has to be front-loaded into the procurement process. So rather than managing it directly day to day, we have to make sure that it's nailed down as far as possible at the procurement stage. It's there in contracts, the contracts, it's there in the tender description, it's in the contracts. Because no matter how far we make the vendors responsible, we're still accountable for what happens to our information assets. The ENISA benefits talks about the centralisation of resources. That does also mean a concentration of risk. and there's no doubt that there is some nervousness around an organisation that has all its information eggs in one basket. Looking at it another way, it also means that you can get to a position where you have a single point of access and control, and certainly in the NEST context, I'm working with colleagues to get that right. If we can get assurance and identity mechanisms right, if we can get that single gateway and deliver that effectively, that is a big change to the way we manage our information, and as well as providing access to users. A little bit of an oversimplification, and I think it's very unlikely that any organisation will be able to get all of its information assets into a single platform. So, for example, depending on the type of content you're working with, so say an organisation decides to use Office 365, that sounds great. You can do all sorts of things in there, and SharePoint in the background, etc. However, there are limitations. So, for example, 250 megabytes, the maximum file size you can upload. It's fine for my day-to-day work, but I've got colleagues who are working with video and other multimedia objects which are much bigger than that, so we will have to look at other solutions for them. But I think still getting identity and access management right at the front end will allow us to manage that more effectively. The UK government, interestingly, the latest version of the G-Cloud has moved away from the model of pan-government accreditation. So what was being done previously is that the team, I think they based at the Cabinet Office, I think, they would assess offerings and give a security classification effectively. They would say, we have certificated this to provide information at this level, to host information at this level of security. They've moved away from that, partly in recognition of just the sheer complexity of that task, but also the fact that organisations really have to make their own risk judgments. So it's now up to the suppliers to self-assure, so to assert that they meet particular standards, and it's up to organisations to make their own risk assessment and choose cloud vendors. Not going to go through these, but these are the cloud security principles that the G-Cloud now uses and that vendors are expected to assure against. And I think you'll probably recognise most of them are mapping against various institutions that we work with. The other biggie, of course, and this is the one that's often cited by people who just want to reject cloud solutions out of hand, is Principle 8 of the Data Protection Act, that personal data must not be moved out to a new connected area without additional controls. I think it's very possible very easy to overstate that. The vendors aren't daft, and they recognise this as an issue and have gone a long way towards meeting the concerns through things like using safe harbour in this space, also increasingly by allowing the option of a guaranteed European-based server hosting, so you can actually build that into your contract. And I know that's not a magic bullet, but to my mind it goes a long way towards allowing an organisation to be quite assured that it's put that specific issue to one side. Most of what we're talking about is more about information security and data protection and records management, although where one begins and ends these days, I don't really know. And I don't really care because I'm responsible for all of them, so it's a bit of a moot point. But in terms of records management, I think there are a few cloud issues. The biggie probably is, certainly in my mind, and this may be a failure of imagination on my part, but I have been doing records management for 20 odd years, putting a lot of emphasis on the reduction of the space we use, physical and digital space. and that being a valuable measure. However, if an organisation buys Google Apps for work, Google say you have unlimited storage, your terms and conditions apply, I'm not exactly sure what they are. You use Office 365, they offer 1 terabyte per user storage out of the box, that's the standard. Put that in context, NHS Education for Scotland, we have 800 odd users. On our network, we back up about 10 terabytes. So, and that's too much. I'm quite sure we can reduce that dramatically. So to move from that to a position where there's 1 terabyte per user, which isn't to say you use that and you manage that down, but I think a lot of people would be aware that if you're in a cloud environment, there's a lot of space there, very apparently at no additional cost. So winning those arguments about retention and disposal around the use of space become more difficult. Not impossible to achieve because of course there's still costs associated, but it becomes tricky. So far in NES, we've looked at our existing records management and information governance policies against cloud requirements, and generally they're fine. We found that our policies still hold. There weren't any really issues that we had to address. We are working on our risk assessment using the statement of applicability from ISO 27001. You'll be hearing a little bit more about ISO 27001 later on. Even if your organisation has no interest in the standard, I would recommend using the statement of applicability, and that's available for free download from various websites. And what it is a description of the 100+ controls in part 2 of the standard. And even if you've no interest in the standard or the certification, it's useful as a sense check for your organisation about what controls it has in place and could have in place. The Information Asset Register, an old favourite, but it becomes all the more important both in managing the cloud environment and managing particularly the transition to the cloud environment, knowing what assets you've got, what controls are in place, how they're hosted at the moment, what the ownership is, what the controls are, when and how could they be moved to the cloud. Working hard as well to build, continue to build relationships with procurement and technical colleagues to make sure that information governance issues are taken into account at the front of the process and we're not playing catch up. We do have good senior support for information security. Our director is keen that we move towards ISO 27001 accreditation for the cloud offering, partly because it's good in its own right, but also to reassure stakeholder community who may be nervous about the idea of cloud hosting. Records management is probably not at the forefront of senior management's mind. But I'll make sure it's addressed on the coattails of information security. We're also able, I think, as we move into cloud, to shift our focus. So rather than having to make sure that the latest antivirus patches, all the software has been updated, and that the penetration testing has been carried out against multiple different web-facing systems, we'll be able to shift our focus to getting access control right on that one gateway, and also putting more energy into user behaviours, which, as we all know, is probably our biggest risk area. But a lot of the energy can be diverted away from that into the day-to-day management of the technical information security management. So the road ahead, we are in the early days of selection through procurement processes. We will have a couple of pilots coming up shortly of different cloud-based productivity tools to see how we go with them. We will, on the back of that, scope how we're going to do our records management. Very good idea of the likely direction of travel, but I don't want to make any assumptions. So it will be when organisations deciding what its cloud productivity tools are, that we can then decide how do we get records management right with that. It's not specific to the Cloude, but our organisation is making a lot more use of agile project methodologies, particularly around Scrum, which is quite challenging because it's rather than the traditional Prince2 project-based methodology, very short, intense sprints of work. And governance is not treated specifically within Agile. So we're having to engage in quite a light touch way on the development and deployment of technology so that information governance doesn't get left behind, because it's not the kind of big project we do a nice privacy impact assessment and develop a security management system during it. So that's a shift in our working as well. And also, as I say, looking towards ISO 27001 accreditation. In terms of the key toolkit for this information asset register, remains absolutely key to it. We are also looking at doing a risk assessment, purely speaking, in two tiers. So we will do full-blown corporate ISO 27001 risk assessment overall on the Cloude programme. But we're also trying to develop light touch tools that agile development teams or people procuring small cloud-based project management tools, for example, that they can use practically and quickly so that we're making defensible information risk assessments, but we're not getting away from the speed and the elasticity that are part of the benefits of cloud. We're also trying to make sure that our instructions to vendors are as clear as possible. Now, certainly, if you're dealing with, if you're doing Office 365 and you're dealing with Microsoft, there's a limit to which Microsoft will take direct instruction from you. That said, they are happy to have data processing agreements in place, albeit they will be template based, but having that clarity around exactly what the vendor's been instructed to do with information continues to be vital. We will also continue to revisit our retention schedules. Our 28-page retention schedule is tricky enough to implement in-house. How implementable it will be on our cloud-based tools is another matter, so we will be looking to simplify our retention policies. In part, I think that will be driven as well by the capabilities of the tools available to us. That's a little bit down the line. We are, as far as possible, trying to make this based, make our decisions based on properly analysed risks, so we're not making assumptions. We are looking at our risk landscape as we go. And as far as possible, as I mentioned, front-loading information governance so that it becomes part of the design and the procurement stage and isn't playing catch-up as usual. Cloud will always mean you cede some control. The important thing is that's done transparently, so the organisation knows which controls it is still directly delivering, knows which controls are ceded to the vendor, and that is documented and is transparent. We've also been keen to make sure that information governance is seen as part of the solution. We are not presenting barriers. We're not saying, oh, you can't do this. We're saying, okay, that's what you want to achieve as an organisation. How can we do that compliantly and reducing our information risk and adding value? As I say, it's early days. Think Cloud. We'll be happy to share experiences as we go. As interested in pilot and other activity and transition to the cloud, you can go around. Thanks.